Every day can start to feel strangely empty when you're building online. You wake up, open your laptop, check the numbers, look at yesterday's post, yesterday's code, yesterday's idea, and somehow none of it feels like it carried over. You were busy, you made things, you published, you tried to stay consistent, but the next morning it feels like the system has already swallowed everything and asked you to begin again. A lot of people describe this as a motivation problem, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's the emotional effect of building inside systems that are designed to reset attention. And once you see that clearly, a lot of your confusion starts to make sense, because the feeling of starting from zero every day usually does not come from laziness. It comes from effort that never had a chance to compound in the first place. That can happen whether you are making videos, writing posts, building products, shipping features, sending newsletters, or trying to grow a small business on the internet. You do the work is real, the energy is real, the hours are real, but the environment around that work is unstable. Attention moves, feeds refresh, platforms reorder priorities. What was visible yesterday becomes invisible today. What performed last week stops performing this week. What took hours to make gets consumed in seconds and then buried. So people start blaming themselves for a pattern that is often structural. They think, maybe I'm inconsistent, maybe I'm not disciplined enough, maybe I need a better system, maybe I need to post more, maybe I need to work harder. And of course, sometimes better work does matter. Better communication matters. Better offers matter, better strategy matters, but none of that changes the deeper issue if all your effort is being stored in places that do not preserve value well. This is where a lot of burnout begins, not because the work itself is too hard, but because the relationship between effort and result feels broken. You push, but nothing seems to stay pushed. You create, but nothing seems to remain created. You show up, but every morning feels like the room has been reset. That experience creates a very specific kind of mental fog. It makes you ask questions that sound productive, but often keep you trapped. How do I grow faster? How do I beat the algorithm? How do I get more reach? How do I stay visible? Those questions are understandable. But they often keep your attention at the platform layer, where signals are noisy and control is limited. And when you live there too long, you start optimizing for movement instead of value. You mistake activity for progress. You become productive in a way that never becomes meaningful. I think this happens to a lot of solopreneurs, especially now, because AI makes production easier. You can generate ideas faster, write faster, edit faster, build faster, automate faster, which sounds like freedom. And sometimes it is, but if your direction is unclear, AI can also help you scale confusion. It can make you more efficient at producing things that still disappear. That's why speed alone does not solve the deeper problem. The real question is not how to make more. The real question is where value actually begins. And for most people, the answer is much simpler than they expect. Value begins when something you do becomes useful to a real person. Not a vague audience, not an imaginary niche, not a number on a dashboard, a real human being with a real friction in their life, work, or business. This is where things start to change. Because when you stop asking, how do I keep feeding the system, and start asking, who am I actually helping, your work becomes easier to understand. Not easier in effort, but easier in direction. You stop trying to manufacture relevance at scale before you have confirmed relevance at the human level. That shift sounds small, but it changes almost everything. Instead of trying to win broadly, you begin by becoming useful specifically. You talk to one person. You listen carefully. You notice what confuses them, what slows them down, what they keep repeating, what they are trying, and why it is not working. And when you pay attention at that level, clarity starts to appear in a way that metrics alone rarely produce. You begin to see patterns. You begin to understand what problem you are actually close enough to solve. You begin to notice that many of your old ideas were built from abstraction, not contact. That is an uncomfortable realization, but also a very freeing one, because if confusion came from distance, clarity can come from proximity. This is the beginning of simplification. Simplification is not dumbing things down. It is removing what was never necessary. It is no longer carrying 10 possible directions when only one is connected to real demand. It is no longer trying to be useful to everyone. It is no longer building a whole identity around output that receives attention but creates no transformation. When you work closely enough to real people, complexity starts losing its power over you. You don't need endless brainstorming because people are already telling you where the friction is. You don't need constant reinvention because the same underlying problems keep appearing in different forms. You don't need to guess as much. You need to observe better. This is where AI becomes genuinely helpful, not as a machine for endless content production, but as a tool for reducing complexity. You can use AI to organize notes from conversations, identify recurring problems, draft solutions, test positioning, structure offers, analyze feedback, speed up execution, and remove friction from repetitive tasks. In that role, AI is powerful, because now it is serving contact with reality, not replacing it. That distinction matters. A lot of people are trying to use AI to escape uncertainty. But uncertainty is often reduced more effectively by talking to a few real people than by generating 100 synthetic ideas. Real interaction creates signal. Signal creates direction. Direction makes execution simpler. And once execution is simple enough, it becomes mechanical. That word matters to me. Mechanical does not mean soulless. It means the process no longer depends on constant emotional drama. You know what problem you are helping with. You know who it is for. You know the next useful step. So you do it again. You refine the message. You improve the offer. You publish the insight. You follow up. You ask what was helpful and what was still unclear. You adjust, then you repeat. This is the part many people skip because it looks too simple. But simple does not mean easy. Simple means there are fewer moving parts between effort and learning, and that is exactly what most overwhelmed people need. Not more inputs, not more strategies layered on top of unresolved confusion, just a tighter loop between helping, observing, refining, and repeating. When that loop is grounded in real humans, iteration starts becoming meaningful. You are no longer iterating based on random platform mood. You are iterating based on feedback. Feedback is what tells you whether your assumptions match reality. It tells you whether your words are clear. It tells you whether your offer solves the problem you think it solves. It tells you whether your process actually creates value outside your own head. That kind of feedback is easy to ignore when you are addicted to broad metrics. Because broad metrics feel bigger, views feel bigger than conversations, impressions feel bigger than trust, reach feels bigger than usefulness. But if no real person is being helped, the size of the number can hide the emptiness of the outcome. That is why some people are constantly visible and still deeply stuck. They are present in the system, but absent from the human layer where compounding actually starts. And this is the part I wish more people understood earlier. Platforms matter, but not for the reason most people think. They matter because they can help you reach more real humans. That's it. They are distribution. They are not where value is safely stored. They are not the foundation of your business clarity. They are not the source of your long-term signal. If you treat the platform itself as the place where value lives, you will always be vulnerable to reset. Because the platform can change the rules, the visibility, the incentives, the format, the audience behavior, all without asking you. And then emotionally, it feels like your life's work can vanish overnight. But when value is rooted in your understanding of real people, in your ability to solve problems, in your pattern recognition, in your relationships, in your repeatable process, then a platform shift becomes disruptive, but not terminal. You still have signal, you still have clarity, you still know what matters. That is a very different way to build, especially as a solopreneur, because being alone in business often makes you think you need scale early. So you try to compensate with systems, automation, content volume, brand polish, and constant experimentation. But often what you actually need is contact. A few better conversations can do more for your direction than months of isolated optimization. A few honest responses can save you from building the wrong thing beautifully. A few real people can teach you what the market actually means in practice. Then your work changes. Your content changes too, because now your content is no longer created just to survive the feed. It becomes a bridge. A way for the next real person to recognize themselves in a problem you now understand more clearly. A way to communicate what you have learned through direct interaction. A way to attract people whose friction matches the thing you can help simplify. This is when content starts becoming useful again, not because content itself suddenly compounds, but because it connects more people into a loop that can. That loop matters more than any individual post. Direct human connection leads to simplification. Simplification makes AI-assisted strategy more effective. That makes execution more mechanical. Mechanical execution makes iteration sustainable. Iteration generates feedback. Feedback creates clarity. Clarity improves value. Improved value expands reach, because useful things travel further when they actually help someone. And results begin to emerge from that process. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. This is why compounding is often misunderstood. People talk about it like a tactic. Post consistently and it will compound. Ship every day and it will compound. Build in public and it will compound. Sometimes maybe. But not automatically. Compounding is not something you force by repeating empty motion inside a reset-heavy system. Compounding is what emerges when repeated action is tied to real human signal long enough for learning to accumulate. That is very different, and honestly much calmer, because now you no longer need every single day to prove something. You no longer need every post to validate your identity. You no longer need immediate visible results to believe the work matters. You are building from contact, not performance, from signal, not noise, from usefulness, not constant display. So if you keep waking up feeling like you are starting from zero, maybe the answer is not that you need more energy. Maybe the answer is that too much of your effort is being poured into places that cannot hold value for very long. And if that is true, then the way forward is not to become louder inside the system. It is to move closer to real people. Start there. Find one person. Understand one problem. Simplify one path. Use AI to reduce complexity, not multiply it. Execute simply. Repeat consistently. Learn from feedback. Let clarity emerge from contact. Use platforms to reach humans, not to store your worth. Because in the AI era, content and code can disappear into systems that reset attention by design. So you cannot rely on platforms as the place where lasting value is built. Real compounding starts when you stop creating for systems and start working directly with real people.